Hi, and welcome to the beginning lecture for Business Communications 2. We're going to start with Chapter 1. This is going to be a brief lecture over the contents in this chapter. This isn't a very lengthy chapter, as you may notice flipping through the book. This chapter introduces you to the content of the writing portion of the text, which is separated into two sections. There's a writing portion and a speaking portion. So the first 2/3 of the semester we will focus on writing portion of this particular chapter, which begins with us defining what is good writing. What does it look like? The book lays it out pretty clearly. It's a quick and easy read, which is the point of what your writing should be. It should be easy to read. It should entice readers to want to continue to read. So over the course of the semester, I hope to give you some tools you can use to make your writing more appealing. So the first chapter that the book covers is the concept of plain English. We're taught that plain English is not necessarily a third grade style of writing. Instead, it's the way that most professionals should write. It's exactly the style of writing that most people should or would prefer to read in. The BPE, also known as Before Plain English, is a very bureaucratic. It's very difficult to read. It's used by people who want to prove how intellectual they are by using some big words and having these huge sentences that's hard to read. And a couple of people come to mind when I think of someone speaking before plain English. I don't know if you guys know Dr. Michael Eric Dyson. If you've ever looked at any of his lectures online, he uses a lot of big words. And another person I can think of off the top of my head would be Pastor T.D. Jakes. I've heard him use some big words as well. So the whole point of communication, especially if you're trying to convey something, is to get that point across. If you're communicating in a big way, or if you're communicating in a way that people can't understand, then you're not doing anything but wasting your time. A big component of the class is to identify your audience, identifying who it is you are speaking to, and then crafting a message that you can get your point across. Now, if you're dealing with a very technical type of subject matter with professionals and experts in that field, then maybe technical speak is okay. But for the most part, you're not speaking to professionals in a particular area. You're speaking to everyday people that may not have the expertise. So it's important to use plain English in order to get your point across. So talking about plain English, it encompasses doing something of the following things that are outlined in this chapter. First, you want to make your main point easy to find. This is contrary to Before Plain English. Some writing styles encourage you to find some type of documentation up front and then ultimately reach a conclusion. So for example, if you do a research paper, you'll provide findings and try to remain objective as possible, and then ultimately based on your findings you'll reach a particular conclusion. However, in business writing, that isn't the best thing to do, because remember, you're dealing with people who have time sensitive schedules. They have a lot of things going on and they don't want to go through your 10-page document to figure out what's going on or what your main point is. So in business writing, you want to make your main point up front. Within the first couple of sentences, couple of paragraphs, it should be front and center so that your readers know where you're going and they can decide if they want to continue reading. In regards to your writing, after your main point, you're going to provide all the documentation to support what you're trying to say. Secondly, so the second part of following plain English is writing the way you talk. This is contrary to how you're taught in school. We're taught to write very legalistically, to follow all types of rules regarding grammar, punctuation, and it really makes use very, it makes it very rigid with no flexibility. So we feel like we have to write in a very specific bureaucratic way. However, the best papers that tend to be most interesting tend to be written in a way that people actually communicate. Everyone is most likely articulate in this course and can convey a message in a personal fairly well. So, but when you start writing something on paper, you try to start making the information being conveyed sound more important by using different words, and you may even pull out a thesaurus to put some of these words in your paper, when really if you just write the way you talk, then people would probably want to read what you're writing. I don't want to imply that that you should use slang. There is a certain code of professionalism that in business class that you still want to present, and you want to be as professional as possible, but you don't want people to be looking up words trying to figure out what you're trying to say when you're communicating. And lastly, you want to use good layout. Layout is what helps draw your readers to certain things. If you were to write a one-page paper, you wouldn't want to put it into one paragraph because that's not appealing. If I'm the reader and I'm looking at that, I probably wouldn't want to read it because it's just a solid block of text. You want to use things like headings, because headings and things that are underlined and boldface will draw the reader's attention to certain areas. It's important to draw their attention to certain things that you want them to see, that you feel that's important for you to convey. It's also important to use bullet points. People don't use them often enough, but they are good to use when you're trying to convey a large amount of information and you don't want to write it all out in a paragraph or a sentence. You can just use bullet points to explain the information fairly quickly, but also in a way that's easy for the reader to view because it spreads out the bullet points instead of it being in a block text. The last thing I will say in regards to layouts is the use of graphics. You can use graphics to convey your message without using text. We all know that reading isn't always the best way for people to comprehend things. Some people are visual learners. There's also audio learners, which is why I try to record these lectures. You can use graphics, tables, and charts to convey information. So let's say if you're trying to talk about data, it might be better to use a graph instead of explaining it in a paragraph form. I can look at a graph and instantly draw a conclusion instead of reading a bunch of text to draw the same conclusion. The book clearly outlines the difference of plain English versus before plain English. I have an example of the excerpts that's from the book that I want to go over to compare and contrast between the two. This is an example of before plain English, and this is in regards to a government regulation. So working in education as well as working in city government, I'm exposed to these type of languages, which can be intimidating to read and can leave you wondering what you just read. So I'll read this for you. It says, examinations of bids by interested persons shall be permitted if it does not interfere unduly with the conduct of government business. Original bids shall not be allowed to pass out of the hand of government officials unless a duplicate bid is not available for public inspection. The original bid may be examined by the public only under the immediate supervision of a government official and under conditions that preclude possibility of substitution, addition, deletion, or alteration in the bid. So many of you read this and may get what the point of it is. It may not be difficult to understand. It's just the way that we get there is interesting because there is a lot of text here. But really what is being said is that you can't get a duplicate bid unless there's one, unless there is one available, and if you want to review one, there has to be someone present so that you don't forge anything. That's really what the excerpt is trying to say. But you look at the amount of text and you see the way they are conveying the message is very rigid and stuffy and impersonal. And that pretty much embodies what plain English is. You've seen a lot of this over the years, and you may even use it in your writing, which is okay because we all are guilty of writing like this, but it isn't the best way to write. Now compare that with this same excerpt that's being translated into plain English. Instantly you notice that there's a lot less words. So I'll read this here and we'll go through it. Can you look at a copy of another company's bid? Yes, if there's no undue interference with government business. If a copy isn't available, you can look at an original bid. In that case, a government official must be present to make sure no one tampers with it. Fairly simple and straightforward. If you were to ask someone about this in their department about this particular question of copying someone else's bid, this is probably the answer they would give you in person, verbally. So why not use this in your writing? Because it's easy to read. This is a good comparison between these two formats. You're going to get some practice with this. Okay, so we're going to end here with a brief discussion of what is good writing. So good writing is a couple of different things. Good writing doesn't necessarily follow all the rules. There are a lot of rules that's been passed down over the years. Most commonly are the rules where you shouldn't start a sentence with and or but, which you can do that. My point is that there are a lot of rules made that you don't need to follow. There are some that are fairly concrete, and there are others that are just someone else's opinion. So following all the rules doesn't mean you'll have good writing, because you can have very bureaucratic type writing that no one can read, and I wouldn't classify something that follows the rules as good writing if no one can understand it. So this is very important. Good writing is very easy to read. Someone should be able to pick up the document or paper and instantly be able to understand and easily read. We don't write just for fun in business. We write with the purpose of giving information. So if we want to convey that message without someone needing clarification, we need to write in a way that's easy to read right off the bat to eliminate those conversations. I mentioned this in the beginning, but you want to understand your target audience because you want to write to their level. As I mentioned, that if you have a technical audience and experts in the field, you're writing something in regards to a medical briefing and you're communicating to doctors, then it's appropriate to use technical wording because they understand it. But if you're communicating that to a bunch of non-medical college students, that's not the best idea because they may not be familiar with the technical language, because you're going to alienate some of the listeners and readers. Lastly, good writing is something that people want to pick up and read. In regards to resumes, good formatting can make or break whether your resume gets looked at. So the look of something is very important. It goes against the saying, you shouldn't judge a book by its cover. But people make impressions very quickly within the first 10 to 15 seconds, which is okay. You just want to be aware of this and making sure you put your best foot forward and gain their interest at the very beginning so that ultimately they can read the rest of your writing. Okay, that covers everything I want to touch on in this lecture. There will be subsequent lectures to come that will be available to you throughout the course of this semester.